Afternoon. My sincerest apologies for the delay. Just having some technical difficulties there. So today, yeah, we would hope so. So the purpose of today is to basically confirm the strategic case and the direction of the economic case for our program business case for local road improvements. Been told I'm talking too quietly. This piece of work is the program of works we have largely to adjust to the challenges of growth and the network demand changes that O2NL will contribute to for our network. You'll recall the workshop we had where we looked at the long list of projects and we went into the room on the side to basically list all the ideas. Today we're not going to be talking about individual projects, but rather we're going to look at the outcomes we're trying to achieve with the overall program. We're trying to look at and consider what problems we're trying to solve, what benefits we're trying to achieve, and try to quantify some measures that we can target for basically delivering it. So what do we want from today's workshop? Broadly, we're seeking agreement on how we want to describe and weight the problems that this project will address, the benefits that this program will achieve, and we want to get your agreement on the investment objectives and associated measures for our program business case. So this is basically the strategic case of the program business case. We also want to give you our approach for how we'll basically group programs up to compare against these objectives. And we want to give you a rundown of how we'll be approaching the shortlisting process by assessing the criteria, including the investment objectives and critical success factors. There's a lot of words there that you may or may not be familiar with, that may be a bit foreign to you, but we'll get through this all and we'll try and keep the language as the transport plenary sort of language to a minimum and keep it as understandable as possible. So that later bit is basically how we'll approach the economic case of the program business case. Okay, I need to talk louder. Yeah. So what we've got here, this is called an investment logic map. So on the left we've got problems. They're basically what's the cause, what are we trying to deal with. Then in the middle we've got the benefits. So the benefits are the good stuff that will come out of dealing with the problems. And then on the right we basically try to describe investment objectives with a bit of specificity. So we want to lock down exactly what we're trying to achieve. So So each problem, these aren't the problem statements, it's just an explanation of how they work. So each problem statement, as you list them, you can have a number of them. You don't want to get so many because you need to weight them and assign a percentage weighting. If you have too many, it sort of mucks up the process. But 3 is a good number to have. 7 is probably too many. So each problem is given a percentage weighting of how important we think dealing with that problem is. And dealing with each problem will basically link to a specific benefit. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong thing. Benefits will be used in a multi-criteria analysis for selecting and prioritizing projects as criteria. Percentage weightings depend on the weightings given to the problems, which then contribute to achieving the benefits. So if we have problem 1 and we say that's worth 30% and it contributes equally to benefit 1 and 2, then benefit 1 would have 15% from problem 1 and maybe some more from problem 2 or problem 3. The weightings then translate to weightings basically considering how stuff gets prioritized in a multi-criteria analysis. Investment objectives measures the KPIs associated with the benefits. So a safety benefit could be measured as a percentage reduction in death and serious injury crashes by a certain date. When projects are assessed in the MCA, they're judged by how much the project is anticipated to contribute to achieving that specific objective. The objectives will be tracked and measured as the program is delivered. It's quite good to make if possible, to align the investment objectives with other basic measures that we already have. So we have to do SSPs, for instance, or we've listed some KPIs in our activity management plan. So we've already committed to measuring and tracking those specific things. So it feeds into this quite well. So problem 1, I'm just going to go through the 3 problems to see how we've described it. To give you a little bit of background, so we had an officers workshop going through this process in February last year. So we went back and forth for a long time deciding on the wording, and we did come up with our own weightings for these problems and benefits. So I want to talk through the wording we've got and describe the problems that we as officers worked up. And I want to hear from you about if you're comfortable with the wording and what sort of weighting of importance you'd like to give each individual project as a group. So it'd be good to have quite an open discussion once we've described the problems and we're back on that ILM graph. So the main one broadly we're considering is traffic. So the forecasted increases of traffic on future key corridors. So this is contributed broadly by Otaki to North Levin, as well as population growth, in addition to sort of like change in use of land. So where we have agricultural activity, land that's been used for agricultural activity, which in the 10 years' time it might be used for industrial activity, it'll create additional needs for the transport network. It's expected that there will be a lot more heavy traffic on local roads than there currently is, some specific key corridors, and there'll be a bit of a change in direction in the major flows of traffic where it's predominantly there's a lot of north to south movement, but the sort of reorientation of the network will be around Levin a lot more east to west with Otaki to North Levin. This is going to result in some changes to maintain the local roading network. So I know we're not talking about projects today, but to just give you an example of what this means. If we consider Tararua Road, if we don't undertake any improvements on Tararua Road whatsoever, if we do minimum option, I'd probably say the road would be unmaintainable within a number of months following the opening of Otaki to North Levin. When I say unmaintainable, within a fairly short period of time, there would be more pothole than road. It would just not be sustainable to be able to physically maintain it. At that point, it costs less to invest and upgrade it than it would be to try and keep the road operational. We don't want that to happen. We want to get in there before the opening of Otaki to North Levin or before any other significant demand change that would cause a similar issue, have the investment. We don't want the investment 20 years before the problem happens. We want it sort of just in time, so we're maximising the value of the investment that we put in. But that's kind of the best example I can give you to consider for this particular problem.
Sorry, James. What part does revocation play in an arterial route like
that? So revocation specifically for Tararua Road, there should not be a significant overlap. There will be considerations that we need to give regard to. So if we are expecting, if our plans for the future of the existing state highway require something of our local roads, we should have some consideration of what we need to do with our local roads. And a bit later in the piece, I'm going to talk a little bit in detail about how we're doing that interaction. That's a good point. That's reminded me of, if you recall last week's briefing from my esteemed colleague Vanuka and Lonnie, there was a strong emphasis about the importance of how we put our vision down, our strategic case for our program business case, and how that can relate to the revocation work. So the revocation policy, there's a broad theme of you set the agreement for revocation based on an agreed level of service, and what guides the agreed level of service is a similar situation on the local road network. If we want to consider our vision for revocation, there should be a similar approach to our vision for our local roads. So the problems that we consider and the benefits that we want for our local road network, we should expect a level of alignment for what we want out of revocation. We're not able to go into the detail of exactly intersection by intersection, asset by asset of what we want for revocation at this stage. We can't influence that through our program business case, but what we can do is consider what's important for us is having infrastructure that's going to be fit for purpose for its future use in terms of traffic loading, in terms of safety, in terms of accessibility for walking and cycling, or that sort of thing, or the value for money components. These are things that, if they're important for revocation, they should be important for our local roads. I'll move on. Yeah, it's my fault. So the change in use is also a bit of a problem. So if we've got an intersection that currently works fine for maybe 1,000 movements a day for it, but we're forecasting that it could reach anywhere between 8 or 12,000, we can't just assume that that intersection would be right. We need to investigate what potential safety improvements need to be done, what plans need to be put in place so that the intersection continues to work safely and can also sustain an acceptable level of service, that you don't put in an intersection where people are going to have 15-minute delays waiting to get to work every day. Another potential impact of traffic demand changes is when you have a particular bad spot, like people will avoid them. They will go through roads where we haven't planned to allow for extra traffic, or the land use, it's maybe more vulnerable to extra traffic affecting it. If you've bought a house in a quiet residential road and all of a sudden O2NL opens up and there's freight trucks going past your house every 13 minutes, you're going to have a pretty bad time. That's a negative effect that we'd like to plan our network around avoiding. So that's broadly the traffic problem covered off. Yeah, okay, I just talked about that. Problem number 2, severance. So severance means basically it's hard to get across the existing state highway or state highways and the rail line. They bisect a lot of our communities. They can make it particularly bad for people walking and cycling, but they also have a pretty acute problem for traffic. the problem for walking and cycling, you can consider it to be worse for walking and cycling because, basically, you can't get across the rail everywhere. There's level crossings every so often. And a 5-minute trip to the level crossing is a lot bigger. It's a lot easier in a car. It might be 5 minutes in a car. It might turn a 15-minute walk on foot into a 45-minute walk on foot. This sort of bisecting, it has some wide-ranging effects, the severance. It can make it harder for people to get to their jobs, access community facilities, and it can just be the small, it can be the factor that just makes people not want to take the trip that they other would have taken. If people maybe want to visit their friend who lives on the other side of town and they can only walk or cycle, or maybe they're in a mobility scooter, getting across Oxford Street could just be that thing that they makes them think, well, I don't actually want to cross Oxford Street today. It's too much of a chore, and they decide not to. This is a existing and forecasted problem, so it's hard to predict exactly what this will look like in the future. Immediately following O2NL, we're expecting a reduction in traffic on Oxford Street, which should see a reduction in the severance. It's ultimately the traffic which is causing the severance in Levin, but it's not just a problem in Levin, of course. Manukau, Shannon, Foxton, they all have quite an obvious state highway that can make it a little bit trickier to get from one side of town to the other. But it's also a more targeted problem in specific circumstances. So there's a number of marae in the district where they're separated physically by a rail line or a state highway from the uruha, which is it's not a problem that affects everyone, but it's a pretty significant problem for the people it does affect. It contributes to a wide range of issues. So it sort of contributes to the decentralized nature of the Levin's town centre, how Levin's strung out. It's not a nice, compact, walkable shape. It somewhat constrains the viability of a commercial centre being on both sides of the state highway and the rail. And it creates a bit of weaker community cohesion, potentially your friend group, if you grew up in Levin, was everyone who went to the school on that side of Levin, and you went to the college on that side of Levin, and you didn't really have as close an interaction. Also, poor amenity and user experience. If you've ever sat outside Whispers having a cup of coffee when the stock truck goes past, it's not a fun time. But that's broadly the severance problem. Transport modes, problem 3. It's too hard to get around without a car. So we don't have a great network for walking and cycling in our district. We have some places that are good, but it's not fantastic overall. This problem disproportionately affects people who are already disadvantaged. So people who are particularly susceptible to this, they might not be able to afford a car, or it might be significantly expensive. Aging people might not be able to drive. Youth, it's just a problem that affects people who are already sort of starting off behind. So there's many things that contribute to this. Poor condition or poorly designed footpaths. We spoke at length about this topic prior to the long-term plan process with our activity management plan, and how we're approaching that with our regular business as usual type activities. Poor coverage of street lighting. So about 10 years ago, we converted most of our street lights into LED bulbs, which reduced our power bill by about 75%, I think, which is quite good month on month. But there was probably a gap that we didn't really look at upgrading the coverage. And if you walk around anywhere in the district at night, it's not hard to see some gaps with the street lighting level of service. And there's a lot of areas with no footpath at all, particularly in the smaller settlements, the beach settlements. There's a lot of areas with no footpaths at all. There's a range of reasons for that. Occasionally, we'll want to put a footpath in, and the community group will say, actually, we like the feel, the look and feel of the beach town, and we don't really want it to be too developed and urban feeling. And we sort of have to weigh that up against the disbenefit of there'll be people who really do want a footpath if they need to push a pram around, or if they're in a wheelchair, just walking on a berm isn't really an option. And there aren't enough cycle paths, basically, and the ones we aren't, they aren't really connected. The network's really only good when it's connected to itself, and the few cycle paths we do, they're a bit disparate. Public transport provision is pretty lacking, I think, and I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically with how we're integrating our planning with Horizons. And severance and increasing traffic exacerbates this problem. Increasing traffic makes it harder to get around in a car, obviously, but it also has an effect of making it harder to get around on foot or on a bicycle. So here I've got the problem statements put up on the screen, and I'd like to open up for a discussion. If we had 100 percentage points to split between these three problems, who would like to have a crack at splitting them up? And while we do this, I'm just going to X out because I'll of the presentation view, and I'll type in as we go.
Oh, in the interest of efficiency, I'll go traffic 50, transport 30, severance 20.
Well done. That equals 100. Have we got any further development on 50, 20, 30 on the table?
Without going into the precise detail, traffic, I agree, is the top one in terms of the discussion. I think probably I would probably put transport at second also.
For my weighting, I'd probably go, I don't mind a 50, 30, 20 split, but I'd pick severance as being the biggest issue for me with traffic, and then transport after that. I just think finding solutions to get around safely, they expected east-west flows going to be a big problem.
James, for me, 50, 30, 20.
All right.
I'd be the same as that too.
Right. So I don't want to have to reconcile this by doing a vote or anything like that. Ideally, we want something that the whole table is comfortable with, and we can proceed. So
is that traffic at the top there, is what's kind of the background of that? Is it crystal ball gazing, or is it more concrete than that?
there's an there everything is always forecasting. There's traffic modelling, which we've looked at. It's mainly we're working off the models done by O2NL. So they do these quite complex models that are based on traffic counting data. They make assumption of growth percentages per year, and they basically have new nodes of traffic coming in from the interchanges with Otaki to north of Levin. And we do some sensitivity testing, so we have a high growth sort of 99th percentile, a medium growth 75th percentile, and a sort of a low growth 50th percentile, and we consider all these options. I can say with certainty that there will be traffic problems, that the network will deteriorate faster, there will be intersections that will have unreasonably bad delay times if we do nothing. I can't say this intersection will be having 2-minute delay times at the AM, at the morning peak from the 3rd of November 2030. I can't give you that detail, but I can say over a long term, these will certainly be problems across our network.
I'd rate the traffic one higher, then I'd probably go 70, 20, 10.
Is there a range of percentages that everyone would support, even if you're not happy with one of them? Is there any more to add for us to talk about?
I was just going to suggest that, Rogan. I think that's a good compromise.
Would anyone be unhappy with a compromise of 60 traffic, 20% severance, 20% transport modes? I actually don't have that on me. It was different. I have to say it was. I have to be honest. It was a different time. It was February last year, and the information we have now is the growth information, the census data, the confirmation of O2NL being locked down, the removal of any uncertainty. It has changed our thinking. So I wouldn't be comfortable if we were just doing it as officers. If we didn't have a council and we had an officer dictatorship, I still would want to revisit it at this stage because circumstances have changed too much.
About the population, and I mean, we know what the result is for Horo Whenua, but digging down a little deeper, do we know if it's concentrated in areas like perhaps Foxton or Levin's an obvious one, but because if they've had a hike over there, that east-west, the severance, when you think about Union Street, Cook Street, Avenue, North Road, like already it's quite a challenge to cross over that section on Foxton State Highway 1, and with the increase, I kind of think that's a bit more important than that transport mode in Foxton's case, and even perhaps in Levin. So I would still rate severance a little bit higher than even though I'm keen on the public transport with Horizons, where that's going, but still, I would, if the top one's going to be 60, I'd like to see severance a bit higher.
Just add to that, James. Just add to that. You've probably been in the room a number of times when various ones, David, myself, Barry, some of the other team, have brought up that issue in Foxton, particularly around those 4 crossings, to Lonnie and Linda when they've been sitting in here. My question would be then, in regard to that, do you think weighting that at 20% gives that enough weight to say to continue? And I know it's a large NZTO Waka Kata issue. Would that give it the appropriate weight to keep driving that concern and hopefully some kinds of solution by weighting that at 20%?
I suppose for that specific scenario, it's not good practice to sort of like go to the end of the process and think about how it should work when you're shortlisting, when you're picking your problem statements. You should try and kind of do the problem statements focused, like in an unbiased way, I suppose. But I'm going to do this anyway. So the Union Street or White Street or Cook Street in Foxton. Yeah. I believe if you had say if we had a project in our program business case to put an intersection improvement, which I believe there could be, I believe there is, in Foxton, you would say it would have benefits for dealing with the traffic problem, it would have benefits for dealing with the severance problem, and then depending on the form of the intersection, if you're making the intersection better for walking and cycling, it would have transport modes. You don't necessarily need to select one particular thing that each project is dealing with. You go through the process and you basically have the investment objectives and the benefits, and you say, well, this will contribute to this benefit and that benefit, and we think it's good, so it's going to go into this program, etc., etc. It is important to be comfortable with the weightings at this stage, but and there will be projects where that case isn't true. There'll be projects where something will deal with traffic and nothing else, or severance and nothing else. But in reality, most projects deal with a lot of things.
I mean, the other, what I think is, well, even from a user's perspective, the live-in severance where you have to cross a railway track and then immediately the state highway in one go, and it gets quite congested on the Queen and the Bath Street. Those two crossings, and yes, they've got the roundabouts, but it's really difficult, and it's becoming even more challenging. The more cars, the more people there are, and that's the kind of severance in the east-west connection that I'm concerned about at those points. So I know there's a little bit of work been going on, but yeah, I still rate that a bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, I'll double down on the fact that if you think about our crossings, there's one single crossing within our region that future. So it's our Queen Street. So unless we want to send everyone to the lights at Queen Street and Oxford Street, and even now with the current traffic flows that we've got at certain times, you're parked up all the way back to the roundabout, and that's the best one we've got. We heard from the schools around how they viewed the Werribee railway crossing. We know what that Liverpool Street into that looks like, let alone what's going to happen when Tarara Road starts getting busy. Tyne Street isn't a solution anymore either. Again, that's just people avoiding Bath Street and Queen Street. All how will change, obviously, with the relocation of State Highway 1. But yeah, our crossings everywhere are problematic. So from a weighting perspective, I think that as officers, they're going to be projects that are going to be more difficult to solve than problem number one.
So how would people feel about 60 traffic, 25 severance, 15 transport modes? The rest. Well, I'm hearing around the table a particular concern for the severance, and 20%, I think, might be underselling it. Is the council's view?
Yeah, no, I've moved to a higher rating with severance. I'm happy with that massaging of that. Smart people in Foxton do a left and a right, by the way. That's what you do, and honestly, it does solve the problem, but we don't want to tell too many people that. That's the trick, yeah. Left and a right.
James, are we talking about after O2NL is finished, or are we talking now for the next few years for this?
So the PBC is not just to deal with O2NL, it's to deal with our existing and forecasted problems on our own network. We have to make an assumption of what the future will look like, and O2NL has to be a part of that assumption. But we're not solely just dealing with O2NL. And I'll talk a little bit more about the programming, but basically any problem that you can see, whether that's for next year or for 2030 or 2040, that all needs to be considered, and this strategic case needs to be good enough that it'll give us that sort of view, that long-term view.
Because for the next, until O2NL is finished, the severance issue is quite significant, I believe. It's already a problem in terms of what we've got now. But the roading may, if you take 25 to 30% of the traffic through the middle of town out, I would imagine the severance issue becomes less of an issue. In Levin anyway, it might actually increase in Foxton. And who knows whether we're still going to have traffic lights in the middle of town. We may decide that we're going to have roundabouts or something. I don't know, but I just, it's going to change, that's all. So for now, the severance issue is, I think, a bigger issue, but that may well change, as well as the traffic situation will change as well. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with 60, 25, 15. And even in Clint's talking about the rail crossings, they're terrible for pedestrians and cyclists at the same time as well, rather than just crossing them. We don't adequately look after pedestrians at all in these spaces. But comfortable where it sits there.
If we do look at the travel model, you're right that in the short period it gets worse before it gets better. When it gets better in terms of removal of traffic from State Highway, there's a big shock of impacts, which is where some areas get much worse. And so it's trying to find that balance, looking at that, that horizon to deal with that shock. But then once the shock's dealt with, there's actually a phase with growth and that reorientation where it starts to get worse again. And if we start to look at the town centre 20 years out, we're effectively back where we started. We remove the traffic, the town grows, and we're back to a similar volume of traffic, and that's where it becomes really important through our revocation strategy aligning with town centre, that if it is a set of roundabouts that we ultimately want to get to post-revocation, that we need to actually understand what that means for the wider network. Are we then actually building Cambridge Street to take the bulk of that traffic? And I know James has warned me today to not get to jumping into talking about projects, but there's a lot of links, and if we purely look at the traffic drivers, there's a case to invest in a lot of it. If it identifies a severance might shift, but there could still be significant severance issues just at different locations, and particularly in areas that don't receive a bypass and then planned in the next 20 or 30 years. What are we going to do in that ensuring period in the likes of Foxton and Shannon?
Okay, so here we're going to talk about the benefits. So if you remember back at the start of the presentation, I talked about how you do the weighting process, but you're considering how the problem weightings feed into the benefits. I think I'm missing a line there. So we have 60% for traffic, and here we've got that contributing to the benefits of safety and access, and we have another benefit down here called amenity. So safety, we're considering basically your simple safety outcomes. We want to see a reduction in death and serious injury crashes. It's a clear benefit of safety. And we're also considering a reduction in personal risk. So there's a personal risk is a term in transport planning, I suppose, or engineering, and it's opposed to collective risk. So collective risk is basically how many crashes are likely to happen on a given road, whereas personal risk is how likely are you to be in a crash when you're on a specific road. Collective risk increases as the busier the road gets, but a dangerous road with low traffic will have high personal risk but low collective risk. It can be considered a bit of a different outcome than just straight safety benefits. Without getting into too much detail, that's how we've described safety. So access is the benefit that's basically considering the travel time reliability, and its access. It's a sort of agnostic access in terms of modal share. So it's better travel time reliability and access for any type of transport. So it's including walking, cycling, public transport, or just driving in the car. So if we have traffic at 60 and it's contributing to safety and access, I might start us off with 20 to safety, 40 to access. And I'd be very keen to hear any discussion or movement on what people think about that.
Can you, I mean, to my way of thinking, that they should almost be equal. But I'd like to understand your rationale for thinking that that the weight should be the other way around. Well, that 40-20.
I was really just wanting to put something on the board to get conversation started. To tell you the truth, Bernie.
My bigger question is why do the top and bottom items only have two potential? Why is amenity not a consideration of traffic, and why is safety not a consideration of transport modes?
I'm happy to add them. It can be.
Yeah.
It would make the lines clear. So traffic could have a benefit for amenity. So if you have less basically delay times at traffic lights or intersections, if you have less asset deterioration, the road network might be in better condition. Personally, I'd say I think the main benefits would be safety and access specifically, and it would be a sort of tangential relationship between amenity and traffic.
Yeah, I don't see a huge one for traffic, but for transport modes, safety is definitely a benefit.
Okay, yep. Can add that. Is there any thoughts on 30-30 for traffic feeding into safety and access? We'll keep going. Severance, access, amenity, and safety. I'd say it feeds fairly strongly. 25 doesn't divide to 3 very easily. 11.6, 11.3. Does anyone have a view on safety being split? I mean, severance being split evenly between those three. No, it's not A. It's
It's 8.33.
8.33. Yeah, I was thinking of the wrong number.
Just I guess the hard thing for this one, James, is if you think about the severance, it depends on, I guess, the location that you're talking about the severance, because they can have different risks or problems, can't they? I mean, the main one in Foxton plainly has always been the safety concerns. Probably overrides in most other stuff. There's still obviously some access user experience as part of the issue as well, but I think when most of us are talking about the Foxton issues, it's mainly, I think we're focused around the safety. So I guess how do you weight that compared to where other examples of severance around the district might be a little bit different, you know?
It's certainly a challenge finding. It's probably specifically a safety, more heavily in safety for Foxton, but we've got to try and sort of massage it through the whole district.
Perceived safety as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
15.5.5. All right. I think we'll just do a sort of one cut of each one, and then add them up for the to consider what the benefits end up with, and then we can do a final finalization. So transport modes, we've only got 15 points to deal with.
Possible.
Should we go 5 on each leg?
Just with that top one, the traffic, because obviously you've responded to safety for transport modes and done a third line there. I kind of think the traffic safety is a bit more like, yes, travel time for the state highways, but that whole user experience and that connectivity, which is amenity, I don't know if that's missing or it's enough just splitting across those two benefits. Yeah, just a bit. Yeah.
So, 55. 55. Oh.
So the challenge for me around that is what area of states are in? Are we talking our local road network, or are we talking the highway network? And their states around these serious injuries within the, if you like, the area that we're talking about. You know, how significant of an issue is it at the moment? Because my thinking is that it's a thing that's outside the urban areas rather than inside the urban areas. And my thinking is that the way GPS is being targeted is about economic access and traffic top reliability. I think probably players might be bigger role in the future, in the short term future anyway, of the district.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the approach we've been taking regarding the direction of the GPS is broadly that our program business case is ours. It's got to survive numerous GPSs and swings and variations of central government. It's got to be what we think is important. It's important to give it regard and consider it, but it should be ours. In terms of safety, it's a good point. It's a little bit of a moving target. So at some point, we're assuming that the existing State Highway 1 will be under our control. How we approach considering historic DSI crash rates that we can compare it to is a bit of work we need to do. We're looking at an option of identifying key corridors and measuring them specifically. We have a small network and we'll be dealing with small areas, so we can't really go from one year to the next. We've got to have quite a long rolling average basically to have numbers that are worth anything. You can go a stretch of road for decades and not have a single crash, but it might be quite a dangerous road. It's just the level of traffic volume doesn't give you enough stats to do everything well. So we still have a bit of work to do in the PBC to lock down that particular measure. And these measures, we'll get a bit more into them on the next slide. I've given you I'll have some ideas of what they'll look like, but they will be subject to change, and we will work through them as we basically develop how we're going to do that measuring and how that measurement is feasible.
Could you give from traffic that 25%? Can you take 5 from that and put it down to the user experience of the network?
So here are balancing information to reduce the safety access.
Well, here's the thing about, like, do near misses, which I'm sure there's plenty, get counted?
Not really, to be honest, no. So we have...
Because I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
Near miss. Oh, gee.
We can collect them in terms of CRMs, but the main data source we use is the crash analysis system, which is driven by police basically turning up to the crashes and reporting on them. So we get non-injury crashes, minor injury crashes, serious injury crashes, and fatalities. And there's sort of assumed levels of under-reporting for each category. The police won't necessarily turn up to every non-injury crash. So for every one that is reported, you might assume that 4 are happening. But a fatal injury, you can assume that the fatal crash, you can assume the police are turning up and it's getting reported.
And the other thing for me is it's not necessarily the road or anything that's contributing to the death and serious injuries. It's sometimes just driver capability and lack of being able to drive properly. So there must be a factor in that safety issue that is a driver responsibility, if you like, in terms of contributing to that statistic. That's why I'm still believe that they're probably equal rather than sort of different.
Thanks for that. So, sorry, Piri, before were you suggesting? Yeah. So that's the third line going down to amenity, is that right? So now we're at 15. That's not adding up now. 20, 30. Are we on board?
Yes, please. Can we move forward? What do we get from this great debate over small percentages? What's the point?
Eventually, we'll have a functional land transport system that's fit for purpose.
Okay, but
Deliver
this
all
is
these
just fluffy
benefits.
words. But Give me the roads.
Okay. We unfortunately won't be going into the specifics on the projects today. So I'm just going to touch off the investment objectives. So basically, we're splitting out the measures for how we'll track the delivery of the program. And when we're shortlisting and deciding the list of projects at the end, we'll be considering basically how will each project deliver these specific measures. But these measures are likely to change. We need to do a bit more work in locking down exactly how these measures can be considered. But these are some sort of somewhat placeholders, but likely to give you an indication of what they could look like. So for safety, would be looking at potentially reducing deaths and serious injuries on key corridors by 25%. We could look at the view of saying the program business case should cover the whole district, not necessarily isolating key corridors. There's a view that we by doing this, we've been specific and we can measure the exact value of the work we do on where we do the work, and we're not doubling up on the wider sort of targets that, say, our activity management plan or our SSPs seek to deliver or seek to track, and reducing or maintaining personal risk ratings on key corridors for safety. So for access, we've got two specific investment objectives. So we're wanting to increase walking and cycling coverage on key corridors. So we've put a target of safe to cycle, so work some definition through that, to 100% of the key corridors to be confirmed by 2040, and have adequate footpath provision to 100% by 2040. So the footpath provision, it might be all urban zoned areas have a footpath by 2040 or something along those lines. Travel time, so we could have something like maintain travel reliability on key corridors 5 years post opening of O2NL. We could go into the detail of setting average delay time targets for intersections. So we could say we're not going to accept less than a level of service D or an average of level of service C across all intersections in an area or on key corridors or across the whole network. But we'll work through that. So we want to have it specific enough so we can measure it and define it, but we want to make sure we're covering a wide enough area that we're basically getting good outcomes for the whole network. And amenity and user experience. Our plan was broadly to rely on our customer satisfaction survey, which has quite good uptake, quite good engagement, quite good targeted questions. So we do get good feedback on our footpaths, our cycle paths, and our road network. When I say good feedback, I mean lots of it, not necessarily positive, but we get the feedback. It's helpful. Before I move on, is there anything that's concerning to anyone on the investment objectives? Could we generally understand that? Happy with that?
So, James, adequate footpath provision, you'll come back to what that actually means, what that looks like, because what does that mean? Some areas it's like one side, some villages, one side of the street, others it's two. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, that's a good point, and we'll have a specification for it. Broadly, what we'd like to do is we categorize our roads based on something called the One Network framework, which considers not just how busy a road is, but the surrounding land use. So some roads, it may be an appropriate level of service to simply have a footpath on one side of the road for a specific circumstance, but some roads that's not appropriate and needs a full footpath on both sides of the road. And we'll basically define, so we've got our whole network mapped up by what ONF One Network Framework category it is, and we'll say if it's this category, it needs a footpath on both sides, and we'll be able to measure it. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Tick, cross, that sort of thing. Does that make sense? Sorry, that's basically the investment logic map wrapped up. So the key part of it is here, and we'll recirculate this with you following this meeting and can continue discussions, but we're happy with proceeding based on these weightings and wordings, basically. Good. So the next stage, I'm going to go back into presentation view because I don't need to type anything anymore. So I'm going to talk to you about how we'll progress from here. So we can more or less finish we can really finish our strategic case now. We can complete it and we can start preparing to move into the shortlisting process. How that works is that we take our list of our list of projects, our long list, and we start grouping them into potential programs to deliver what we want. And we're going to basically try and fit them into broad themes of what they're trying to achieve. And then each program will go through the shortlisting process to basically compare it against those benefits and problems and investment objectives that we've just talked through. So at this stage, we're looking at 4 programs with a potential 5th. So one that might be more so focused on safety and high risk areas. One that's focused district-wide on access and better connectivity. One that's specifically focused on O2NL and growth, plus some minor district-wide safety improvements. And basically a 4th one, which is just lots and lots of little improvements across the district and the critical improvements to the urban centres. There'll potentially be a 5th program. Basically what happens when you go through this process is you might really like the 3rd program. It might give us 90% of what we want, but it might be missing one thing from the program 1 that we really want. So we can, at that point, make a hybrid program that's got a little bit of 1, a little bit of 2, might have a little bit of 5. And then we say that's overall, out of the whole long list of projects, this is the program that's going to give us the best outcomes. So we've done the project generation. We've got a good idea of what the do minimum is. We've gone through a project filtering process where we've looked at this stuff that we know is already in train or completed or it's out of scope. We're working on and we've got interventions that are in line with the investment objectives, but we've got to do a bit more work here with our other stakeholders. So we're working with NZTA and Horizons to get that long list really tidied up. Everyone's on the same page and it's got everything that everyone is comfortable with in it before it moves into the shortlisting process. And at that stage, once we've got an agreement on the long list of programs, we'll form and we'll basically get the criteria from the process we've just gone through to do the shortlisting. So what we consider when we're shortlisting from the long list, we consider those investment objectives like we just talked about, but we consider 2 other things. We consider the deliverability. So we've got a program budget in our long-term plan. We need to consider if the program can actually be delivered for that much money. We need to consider the consenting requirements and the ability to operate and maintain it over the projected life. So we've got to basically make sure we can do it and we can do it at the right time. And also value for money. So you might have noticed in the investment logic map we didn't have something specifically touching on economic benefits or maintenance cost or something like that. That's because we're considering it as a critical success factor. So the value for money consideration gets considered here for each program. So basically, things will not necessarily proceed into the preferred program if they're unlikely to get a cost benefit ratio higher than 1, or have a negative net present value, which is a term that just basically means if it's not worth doing a renewal, then it will have a negative net present value because it'll cost more than it would save in maintenance costs. We also look at things when we're coming into the economic case of the program business case, where we're considering the impacts and opportunities of the preferred program and consider if there's any adjustments that need to be made because of that. So a little bit more into the technical, how are we going to deal with stormwater on Tararua Road, for instance? How are we going to manage the traffic? Is it better to do work before or after O2NL? Is the traffic going to be more greater or less? Those sorts of considerations. Interdependencies, we don't want to upgrade a road and then have a bad intersection for 3 years at the other end of the upgrade. Environmental effects, social and cultural impacts on Te Ao Māori, and property impacts. At this stage, we're not anticipating many property impacts with the program. We don't have anything that we're a lead delivery agent on where we'll have to acquire land necessarily. So there will be projects that we're not going to deliver. So we are still identifying stuff that Horizons or NZTA or potentially another agency might be in charge of. So we want to continue assessing these projects and considering how important they are based on what's important to us, but we're not going to actually plan to budget to deliver it and put it into our Forward Works programs. This is quite useful from a sort of advocacy perspective, and it can simplify the business case process for other agencies. So it might help Horizons, for instance, gaining funding for the public transport initiatives that service our district if we're putting a focus on it in our program business case. So NZTA and Horizons are our key stakeholders, and we'll make sure that they're in the tent for any assessment processes moving forwards. And this will be detailed in this will be described in quite detail in the preferred program of the program business case. And we have a thing called a management case, which locks down what's been delivered, how it's going to be delivered, considerations for procurement, that sort of thing. There will also be projects that can be delivered in our business as usual work, so our low cost, low risk improvements, our rehabilitations. Basically, we don't necessarily need to do a full-blown business case if a project is less than $2 million. We don't need to do that to attract NZTA funding. It can be basically budgeted for in our regular low cost, low risk programs, and it's justified by our activity management plan. We still run these through our shortlisting process, we still assess them, and that can inform just our general Forward Works program and making sure that we're doing the work. We'll still assess that, we could still measure the benefits because we're still getting the benefits, it's just that the work is through a slightly different work stream. Now I'm just going to touch on how we're handling revocation. So there's going to be some interdependencies between our program and the workforce required for revocation. So I've given an example here that would potentially work through. So our Live-in Town Centre strategy, it's relying on a reduction in traffic on Oxford Street and the CBD to have some amenity benefits, give us some more opportunities to look at new ways that our CBD area could function. Based on the traffic modelling and a high growth scenario, the traffic demand on Oxford Street will have caught up to current levels by 2049. So although we have a bypass, if we don't change anything more, the benefits of better amenity for Oxford Street, they won't happen for us. Eventually the traffic will come back. That is a high growth scenario. It might take longer to get there, but if we don't make a network change, we might not be able to deliver what we want for the Live-in Town Centre. So how we're considering that is that we will need to make an allowance for that traffic to be somewhere else. So we're thinking the most likely place is Cambridge Street. So we're including into our long list work on Cambridge Street that's going to basically cope for that, and might look at the intersections on Cambridge Street and what would need to do there to basically bring it up to a level that could cope with traffic that would otherwise be on Oxford Street. But for that to happen, we really need to assume that revocation will include work that will assist in moving the demand from Oxford Street to Cambridge Street. So we're assuming that there will be work taking place in a separate work stream, but we are not directly handling it ourselves. We're not considering it in terms of the direct benefits or the costs or the economic case for doing it. There is a risk that this work doesn't eventuate. We're not controlling it directly, and we're treating this assumption basically as a risk, that we'll consider what happens if our assumption is incorrect, that we don't work through anything on Oxford Street and Oxford Street remains similar form and function it does today. What will be the consequences of that? What will be the benefits that we might miss out on? What would be alternative options that we could look at through to deliver that benefit? So through the management case, we will consider how we treat the overall program budget. It may be worth sectioning off or ring fencing a particular value of the overall program budget to treat as a program-wide contingency. So we might not have identified for something in a program business case today that needs that there might not be a risk that we've identified today, but there may be something that happens that we would like to allow for the cost. And we're going to base that on how much uncertainty we have at this stage. So basically what we want to do next is progress through to the shortlisting process at an officer level. Today, I think it's fair to say it was a bit of a rigorous process, bit drawn out. The shortlisting process is a lot more than this. It's a lot more in detail. My feeling is this is a task for officers to go away and do and work through and report back to you as transparently and clearly as possible to basically give you an update on how we've gone through the process and where we've landed. And from there we'll be putting more work into the program business case, working through the management case, and getting it ready to finalise. Would be available for review, of course, to council, and then we'd like to get it submitted to the NZTA. So we're targeting 2027 NLTP for the start of physical works. The larger projects will need individual business cases following the program business case for NLTP funding. So we'll work through that following the completion of the program business case. So just a reminder on how we've budgeted for this work in the NLTP. So there's 5 million or a bit over 5 million in 2027, 28 and 2028, 29. Then we've got 3 years of no expenditure from 29 to 32. Largely, we're wanting to complete the projects that we identify as critical for completion prior to O2NL, and then the other ones can wait to post. The reason basically that we've split the funding up, at this stage we think that will do us for getting the critical works done prior to O2NL, and the other work that will happen after. It's early stages, and there'll be another long-term plan with assessing budgets at that point and laying out things. But there are other financial considerations through the long-term plan process and balancing the overall CapEx program. Staggering things a little bit later does have some advantages as well, because we can be working on real data post O2NL rather than planning stuff now that could be off by 5, 10, 20% in terms of traffic growth, what have you. So we can do traffic counts on the key roads and actually see how much delay is happening for a short time before we address them. So as we go through the final stage of the program, or the shortlisting process, we'll be asking ourselves questions like, if we can achieve 80% of our objectives for $20 million of an overall program instead of $33 million, and but we can achieve 90% of our objectives for $30 million, should we recommend a lower cost program? So at a certain point, the investment, it may be giving lower returns at a certain point of investment, I suppose you could say. So you spend more money and you're getting less outcomes than you're worth for the first, say, 20 million. When we work through the program business case, we're going to seek guidance from yourselves on that question, but we'll give you a lot of detail on and context on how that will shape out. And also just a bit on the risk piece. Once we get a grip on the risks in more detail, we'll put a little bit more detail on potential options with ring fencing, a bit of a contingency value out of that overall budget, and whether that's worth doing. Is that sensible at this stage, or is it better to just cover the whole program with projects that are actually going to realise benefits? And that's my last slide. Basically, I'm just wanting to confirm that we're comfortable with the work we did today, and that you're comfortable with us going away to work through the shortlisting process at an officer level and reporting back.
I'll jump in first. I think it's a great tool for this sort of information and stuff. But I guess for someone like myself that hasn't used it a lot, it is a lot to get your head around. Well, I think when you come back with more detail, your net present value and all that sort of stuff, I think it does probably inform it and paint that clearer picture. But other than that, I think it's been very informative.
Yeah, I think it was great to see your plan on how to make a plan to make a plan. I look forward to seeing the plan that actually has some information to comment on. This seems like a fun, tedious step, and I reckon you should skip it and just make a plan. But you do you.
Yeah, it's just probably refreshing that some time ago we went through a process where we all got to draw lines on a map and look at a lot of the problems, opportunities, solutions. There's a long list of upwards of 100 projects that officers have submitted into over the last 5 years. But the next step is really important, that we work alongside our investment partners from NZTA Wakotai around getting this into the process, linking with revocation, linking with opportunities around O2NL, where this provides that skin in the game, that if we identify a couple of key projects, $10 million not being a significant sum of money, for us to have that skin in the game to work alongside the Alliance to ensure that these couple of major issues are addressed ahead of O2L whilst we sort of plan for the longer term and the impacts of growth and all the other aspirations that we have. So it's there's a it looks like a big sum of money. Certainly pre O2L, we're quite fiscally constrained with our Three Waters program that we've only got that $10 million available. I think when we look at the 100 list of projects and try and weigh up a Tullera Road versus a upgrade in the main street of Foxton, there'll be some trade-offs that ideally we can fall back on this process in the direction from today. We'll use that to do that assessment. When we bring it back, we can kind of tell you how that compares with that direction that was provided today, where there might be some trade-offs and some further decisions to make.
Thanks, James. Look forward to that short list, because I think it's going to be pretty crucial in terms of how it fits into town centre development and all those other things, and all the Taurika, the whole 9 yards. In terms of, I hope there's a synergy there in terms of how it all sort of fits together. But yeah, look, I know it's a bit painful to do these preliminary things, but if we don't, then we just get a fait accompli at the end of it. So I appreciate the fact that you've gone to that sort of trouble to ensure that we are part of that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your valuable input. That's it for me.
Thank you.